What happens when one of the greatest actors of our generation sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face a barrage of condescending questions and dismissive remarks from a host who seems more interested in tearing him down than celebrating his achievements? It only took one comment about his age for the entire set to erupt into one of the most shocking confrontations in daytime television history. The morning started like any other on the Lorraine Kelly show. The studio lights were bright, the audience was settled in their seats, and the cameras were ready to roll. Anthony Hopkins had been invited to discuss his latest film project, a role he had poured his heart and soul into for months. He walked onto the set with his usual grace, shaking hands with Lorraine and taking his seat on the famous purple sofa. Lorraine smiled at the camera, her signature grin plastered across her face as she began the introduction. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest with us today. Academy Award winner Anthony Hopkins is here to talk about his new film. Anthony, welcome to the show. Hopkins nodded politely, his hands folded in his lap. Thank you for having me, Lorraine. It's lovely to be here. The first few minutes seemed harmless enough. Lorraine asked basic questions about the film, about his character, about the shooting locations. Hopkins answered each question thoughtfully, his deep voice filling the studio with the kind of gravitas that only decades of experience can bring. But there was something in Lorraine's tone, something sharp beneath the surface pleasantries. So, Anthony, Lorraine said, leaning back in her chair with a casual air that felt almost too casual. You've been doing this for quite some time now, haven't you? I mean, you must be getting tired of all these demanding roles at your age. Hopkins paused, his expression unchanged, but those watching closely could see a flicker of something in his eyes. I don't think passion has an expiration date, Lorraine. I love what I do. Lorraine laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was the kind of laugh that felt like it was at someone's expense, rather than with them. Oh, come on now. Surely you must think about slowing down. I mean, all those young actors coming up. They're bringing such fresh energy to the screen. Don't you ever feel like maybe it's time to step aside and let the new generation have their moment? The panel members sitting off to the side exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah, one of the regular contributors, shifted in her seat. Michael, the entertainment correspondent, looked down at his notes, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Hopkins remained composed, his voice steady. I think there's room for everyone in this industry. Experience and youth both have their place. I've never believed in the idea that one must erase the other. Lorraine leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowing. That's a very diplomatic answer, Anthony. But let's be real for a moment. When you take a leading role, that's one less opportunity for someone younger, someone hungrier, someone who might bring something new to the table. Don't you feel even a little bit guilty about that? Hopkins tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful but firm. Guilty? No, I don't. Should a painter stop painting because younger artists exist? Should a writer stop writing? Art isn't a competition where only one person can win. It's a conversation that spans generations. Oh, please, Lorraine interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. Don't give me the artist speech. This is a business, a cutthroat business. And in business, you either make room for new blood or you get pushed out. Maybe you're just afraid of being pushed out, so you're clinging on as long as you can. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few people whispered to each other. This was not the lighthearted interview they had expected. But surely, Lorraine pressed, her voice taking on an edge that was impossible to miss now. You can see how some people might view your continued presence in leading roles as, well, a bit selfish, holding on to parts that could go to younger talent. Sarah finally spoke up from the panel. Lorraine, I think that's a bit unfair. Anthony Hopkins is a legend. His performances are... I'm talking to Anthony, Sarah. Lorraine cut her off sharply, not even looking in her direction. I think he's capable of answering for himself. Hopkins took a slow breath. I choose the roles I take based on the material and the story. I don't believe age should be a barrier to telling meaningful stories. Some of the greatest performances in cinema history have come from actors in their later years. Yes, yes, we all know about your accolades, Lorraine said, waving her hand dismissively. The Oscars, the BAFTAs, the Golden Globes. Very impressive. But let's be honest, Anthony. Your best work is behind you, isn't it? I mean, Silence of the Lambs was what, 30 plus years ago? How many times can you play the wise old mentor or the distinguished gentleman before it becomes, well, repetitive and frankly quite boring? A woman in the front row of the audience audibly gasped. Another audience member shook their head in disbelief. Hopkins maintained his composure, but his voice carried a subtle edge now. I find it interesting that you measure an actor's worth by how long ago their most famous role was. By that logic, should we dismiss every artist who created their most recognized work in the past? Should we tell them their current efforts are meaningless? I'm not talking about every artist, Lorraine retorted. I'm talking about you specifically. And yes, I do think there comes a time when people need to recognize that their moment has passed. Yours passed a long time ago, whether you want to admit it or not. The audience was silent now. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from light and breezy to tense and uncomfortable. Michael cleared his throat. I actually think Anthony's recent work has been some of his most nuanced. Michael, please, Lorraine interrupted again, her irritation obvious. I'm conducting an interview here. Anthony, you haven't answered my question. Hopkins looked at her directly, his famous, intense gaze meeting hers. I didn't realize it was a question, Lorraine. It sounded more like a statement of your personal opinion. Well, it's an opinion shared by many, Lorraine shot back, her voice getting louder. I'm just brave enough to say it out loud. You know, there's been talk in the industry for years that you're difficult to work with, that you're stuck in your ways, that you refuse to adapt to modern filmmaking techniques. Directors complain about you behind closed doors. Producers roll their eyes when your name comes up. But nobody says it to your face because you're Anthony Hopkins, the untouchable legend. Well, I'm saying it to your face right now. What do you say to that? Hopkins's expression remained neutral, but there was a steel in his eyes that hadn't been there before. If you have specific examples of this alleged difficult behavior, I'd be interested to hear them. Otherwise, you're trafficking in gossip and hearsay. Oh, I have examples, Lorraine said, though she didn't provide any. Trust me, I have plenty of examples. But that's not even the main issue here. The main issue is that you're taking up space that doesn't belong to you anymore. Space that doesn't belong to me? Hopkins repeated slowly. I wasn't aware that creative expression had ownership rules based on age. Well, maybe it should, Lorraine snapped. Maybe we need to have mandatory retirement ages for actors. Clear out the old guard and make room for fresh faces, fresh ideas, fresh energy. The audience is tired of seeing the same old faces in every film. Sarah stood up from the panel desk, her voice rising with indignation. Lorraine, this is completely out of line. You invited Anthony here as a guest to promote his film, and you're treating him like he's on trial for the crime of having a successful career. This is outrageous. Sit down, Sarah, Lorraine snapped without even looking at her. This is my show, and I'll conduct it how I see fit. If you don't like it, there's the door. Maybe we should all be using that door right about now, Sarah muttered, but she remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. Michael, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke up. Lorraine, with all due respect, you're making our show look terrible right now. This isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. This is just cruel. Lorraine whipped her head toward him, her eyes flashing. Cruel? You want to talk about cruel, Michael? What's cruel is an industry that keeps recycling the same old actors while thousands of talented, young people can't get a single audition. What's cruel is Anthony Hopkins here taking roles that could change someone's life. Someone who actually needs the break. Someone who hasn't already had 50 years of fame and fortune. Hopkins spoke again, and his voice was like ice. You're making an awful lot of assumptions about my motivations and my character, Lorraine. You don't know me. You don't know what drives me to continue working. You don't know what roles I turn down or what opportunities I create for others. You're painting a picture based on your own narrative, not on facts. Hopkins remained remarkably calm, though his jaw had tightened slightly. Lorraine, I came here today to talk about my work, about a film I'm proud of. If you have personal grievances about my career or my choices, perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum. Oh, here we go, Lorraine said, rolling her eyes at the camera. The famous Anthony Hopkins ego. You can't handle a little honest criticism, can you? You've been coddled for so long, praised for so long, that you've forgotten what real journalism looks like. Real journalism? Hopkins repeated, his voice still controlled, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. Is that what you call ambushing a guest with thinly veiled insults? Michael spoke up again, his voice firmer this time. Lorraine, I really think we should move on to discussing the actual film. That's why Anthony is here. I decide why he's here, Michael, Lorraine retorted. And right now, I think the audience deserves to hear the truth about Anthony Hopkins. Not the carefully crafted public image, but the reality. You're an old actor clinging to relevance in an industry that's moved past you. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah gasped audibly. Someone in the audience let out a shocked murmur. Even the camera operators seemed uncertain, the footage wavering slightly, as if the person behind the lens was taken aback. Hopkins sat perfectly still for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute conviction. I have spent my entire life dedicated to my craft. I have poured everything I have into every role I've ever taken. I have never asked for special treatment, never demanded praise, never sought to diminish others to elevate myself. I came here today as a courtesy, to share my work with your audience. But I will not sit here and be disrespected. Disrespected? Lorraine laughed again, that same cold, mirthless sound. Oh, Anthony, you're so dramatic. Always the actor, aren't you? Everything's a performance with you. Even this righteous indignation act. You know what? I bet this is all calculated. You knew exactly what you were doing when you came on this show. You knew I'd ask tough questions, and you planned this little walkout to generate sympathy and publicity for your film. Am I right? Is this whole thing just another performance? Hopkins stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was very quiet, but somehow more powerful than if he'd shouted. Do you honestly believe that? Do you truly think I would subject myself to this level of disrespect as some sort of publicity stunt? If that's what you believe, then you understand nothing about integrity. It's not an act, Hopkins said quietly. Of course it is, Lorraine pressed, her face flushed now with anger or embarrassment or both. You know what I think. I think you can't handle the fact that your time is up. The industry doesn't need you anymore. They're just being polite by continuing to cast you. Pity roles, essentially. Charity cases. They feel bad saying no to the great Anthony Hopkins, so they throw you a bone every now and then. Sarah had had enough. She slammed her hand on the panel desk, the sound echoing through the studio. That is absolutely untrue, and you know it, Lorraine. Anthony Hopkins is one of the most respected actors alive. Directors line up to work with him. His performances continue to win awards and critical acclaim. Directors line up to work with his name, Lorraine corrected. His legacy, not his current abilities. There's a difference. Hopkins stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified. I think we're done here. Oh, we're done when I say we're done, Lorraine said, her voice rising. Sit back down, Anthony. We still have 10 minutes left in this segment. No, Hopkins said simply. I don't think we do. Lorraine's face flushed red. Excuse me, you don't get to decide when this interview ends. I'm the host. This is my show. And I'm the guest, Hopkins replied, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire studio. A guest you've treated with nothing but contempt from the moment this conversation turned personal. I accepted your invitation in good faith. I came here to discuss my work, my passion, my art. Instead, you've used this platform to attack me, to diminish me, to suggest that my contributions to this industry are worthless. I won't dignify that with my continued presence. You arrogant! Lorraine started, but Michael cut her off. Lorraine, let him go. This has gone too far. Stay out of this, Michael, Lorraine hissed. Then, turning back to Hopkins, she pointed her finger at him. You think you can just walk off my show? Do you have any idea how privileged you are to even be here? I have millions of viewers, millions of people who tune in every day to watch me. You should be grateful I even gave you the time. Hopkins looked at her, with something that might have been pity. I think you've revealed more about yourself in the last few minutes than I ever could have in any interview. I wish you well, Lorraine. He began to walk toward the exit, and Lorraine shot up from her chair. Don't you dare walk away from me. I'm not finished with you. But I'm finished with this, Hopkins said, not turning around. Lorraine's voice became shrill. You're nothing but a washed-up has-been who can't accept that the world has moved on. You're irrelevant, Anthony. Irrelevant. Hopkins stopped walking. For a moment, the entire studio held its breath. Slowly, he turned back to face her. Do you know what I've learned in all my years in this business, Lorraine? That cruelty dressed up as honesty is still just cruelty. That tearing others down doesn't build you up. And that the truly confident don't need to diminish others to feel important. How dare you? Lorraine sputtered. How dare you come onto my show and lecture me? You invited me here, Hopkins reminded her. You initiated this conversation. You chose to make it personal. You chose to attack rather than engage. Those were your choices, not mine. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between them. Anthony, you don't have to explain yourself. Everyone here knows what just happened. Yes, what just happened, Lorraine jumped in, is that Anthony Hopkins revealed himself to be exactly what I said. Unable to take criticism, unable to handle tough questions, unable to accept reality. Tough questions, Hopkins repeated, and for the first time, there was a hint of incredulity in his voice. You didn't ask tough questions, Lorraine. You made accusations. You insulted me. You belittled my career. There's a difference between challenging journalism and simple rudeness. Oh, please, Lorraine scoffed. You're just upset because someone finally had the courage to say what everyone's been thinking. Who is everyone? Michael asked, standing up now too. Because I certainly don't think that. I don't know anyone in this industry who thinks that. Of course you'd defend him, Lorraine snapped at Michael. You're all the same, all protecting each other, all pretending that these old guard actors are still relevant when they're not. This isn't about age, Sarah interjected. This is about respect, something you seem to have forgotten the meaning of. Lorraine whirled on her. You're both fired. Get off my set. If you're going to side with him over me, you can leave with him. The audience gasped. Michael and Sarah looked at each other, then at Hopkins, then back at Lorraine. You're firing us for defending a guest you're verbally attacking, Michael said slowly. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself perfectly fine, Lorraine said. What I hear is strength. What I hear is someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power. Anthony Hopkins has been treated like royalty for too long. Someone needs to knock him down a peg. Why? Hopkins asked simply. Why do I need to be knocked down? What have I done to you, Lorraine? Have I wronged you personally in some way? Because this feels very personal. Lorraine opened her mouth, then closed it. For just a second, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or maybe the realization that she'd gone too far. But then her expression hardened again. You represent everything that's wrong with this industry. The gatekeeping, the elitism, The idea that only certain people deserve certain opportunities. I've never gatekept anything, Hopkins said. I've never prevented anyone from pursuing their dreams. I've mentored young actors, supported new voices, championed fresh perspectives. Your characterization of me is not based in reality. Isn't it? Lorraine challenged. Or is it just not the reality you want to admit to? Hopkins shook his head slowly. I think you're projecting, Lorraine. I think whatever anger you're feeling, whatever insecurity is driving this hostility, it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with something going on inside you. And I genuinely hope you find peace with whatever that is. But I won't be your punching bag in the process. Insecurity? Lorraine's voice went up an octave. You think I'm insecure? I'm one of the most successful television hosts in the country. I've built an empire. I have nothing to be insecure about. Then why are you so threatened by an actor talking about his film? Sarah asked quietly. Lorraine spun toward her. I told you to get off my set. We're going, Michael said, already moving toward Hopkins. Come on, Anthony. Let's get you out of here. But Hopkins held up a hand. One more thing, Lorraine. I want you to know that I forgive you for this. I don't know what drove you to treat me this way today, but I don't hold it against you. Life is too short for grudges. The simplicity and sincerity of the statement seemed to stun Lorraine into silence. For a moment, she just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, no retort ready. Hopkins continued, his voice gentle. I've been in this industry long enough to know that hurt people hurt people. I hope whatever pain you're carrying gets lighter. I truly do. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit, Michael and Sarah flanking him on either side. The audience sat in absolute silence, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of shock and disbelief. Lorraine stood alone on her set, the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of her isolation. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, to regain control of the narrative, but no words came out. One audience member started clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire studio audience was on their feet, applauding Anthony Hopkins as he walked out the door. Not a single person was clapping for Lorraine. She looked around at her audience, at the cameras, at the empty chairs where her panel members had been sitting just moments before. Her show, her empire, suddenly felt very small and very hollow. Well, she finally managed to say, her voice strained. That was certainly unexpected. We'll be right back after this break. But as the cameras cut away and the studio, lights dimmed slightly. Everyone knew that nothing would be the same after this. The mask had slipped. The facade had cracked, and all of it had been broadcast live for millions to see. Hopkins paused just outside the studio door, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Michael put a hand on his shoulder. You handled that with incredible grace. What else could I do? Hopkins replied. Responding to anger with anger only creates more anger. Someone has to break the cycle. Sarah nodded. Still, you didn't deserve any of that. None of what she said was true. I know, Hopkins said simply. And so does everyone else who was watching. The truth has a way of revealing itself, especially when contrasted with lies. They walked together toward the exit, leaving behind the chaos and the confrontation. Behind them, in the studio, Lorraine Kelly sat alone on her purple sofa, staring at nothing, the weight of her own words settling on her shoulders like stones. The makeup artist approached her cautiously. Lorraine, are you okay? Do you need anything? Lorraine looked up, her carefully constructed composure crumbling at the edges. What just happened? You attacked Anthony Hopkins on live television, the makeup artist said quietly, and he responded with nothing but dignity and grace. That's what happened. Lorraine put her head in her hands. The break wouldn't last forever. Soon, the cameras would be back on. Soon, she'd have to face her audience again, face the aftermath of her own choices. But in this moment, sitting alone on her set, she finally understood the difference between power and respect, between confidence and cruelty. And she realized, far too late, which side of that line she had fallen on. Back in the dressing room, Hopkins sat down heavily in a chair. He looked tired, the weight of the confrontation finally showing on his face. But there was also something peaceful about his expression. The peace that comes from knowing you've stood up for yourself without compromising your values. "Do you think she'll apologize?" Sarah asked. Hopkins smiled slightly. "I don't know, but whether she does or not doesn't change who I am or what I know to be true about myself. That's the freedom in not needing validation from others. You know your own worth." Michael pulled out his phone, which was already blowing up with notifications. "This is everywhere already. Social media is losing its mind." "Let them talk," Hopkins said. "Talk is just talk. What matters is how you treat people when the cameras are off, when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain from kindness except the knowledge that you've been kind. That's the measure of character." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the chaos of the studio feeling very far away now. Outside, the world was reacting, analyzing, taking sides, creating hashtags and hot takes. But in this quiet room, three people simply existed in the aftermath of a storm, knowing that they had nothing to apologize for. Hopkins stood up, straightening his jacket. "Well, I suppose I should be going. I have a film to promote after all, though I might choose a different venue next time." Sarah and Michael laughed, the tension finally breaking. They walked him to his car, shaking his hand and thanking him for his grace under fire. As Hopkins drove away from the studio, he looked in the rearview mirror one last time at the building that housed the Lorraine Kelly show. He thought about all the interviews he'd done over the years, all the journalists and hosts and moderators he'd sat across from. Some had been brilliant, asking questions that made him think deeper about his craft. Others had been forgettable, going through the motions of publicity, but none had ever been quite like this. And yet, as he merged into traffic and the studio disappeared from view, he felt no anger, only a quiet sadness for someone who had let their platform become a weapon instead of a bridge. Only hope that perhaps this moment might serve as a wake-up call, not just for Lorraine Kelly, but for anyone who mistook cruelty for courage, hostility for honesty. The story would be told and retold, analyzed and debated. Some would call him thin-skinned for walking out. Others would praise him for standing his ground. But Hopkins knew that the only opinion that truly mattered was his own, and he could look at himself in the mirror tonight and feel proud of how he'd handled himself. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us can do. Choose kindness when faced with cruelty. Choose dignity when confronted with disrespect. Choose to be the person we want to be, regardless of how others choose to behave. And in doing so, we don't just preserve our own integrity. We set an example for others about what real strength looks like. Not the strength to tear others down, but the strength to remain standing when someone tries to tear you down. Not the strength of the fist, but the strength of the spirit. That's the lesson Anthony Hopkins taught that day, walking out of that studio with his head held high. And it's a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of that television set, touching everyone who witnessed it, reminding them that grace under pressure is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength there is.